Hi then, so welcome to my next video. I'm recording this from Narnia. As you can see, we've had a bit of a dump of snow in the UK, so what made me think about is do a talk on wild camping in the UK in the winter time. So what I'm going to be doing is just talking through some of your kit preparation and planning and the considerations that go into it. Right then, so why would you want to go wild camping in the UK in the winter? Most people think you're a bit of a loon. You know, you've got weather like this, or it could be hammering down with rain like it is quite a lot in the winter. But there are some benefits to wild camping in the UK in the winter. So the first one is the quiet. So generally, because the weather's a bit harsher, you're going to have less people out there. So less people on the hills, more quiet, and generally most people will see that as a bit of a benefit. You'll also have less wildlife, which means less bugs. So, you know, you're not going to get bugs in the UK in the winter. In places like Scotland and other areas as well, you may get quite a lot of bugs knocking around in the summer, but not in the winter. Scenic, as you can see here, looking around, it's really scenic. It looks lovely. I mean, go up to the Brecon Beacons when it's been snowing, and it's amazing. It just looks fantastic. And the last sort of benefit really is to test yourself and test your kit. Okay, so just, you know, testing yourself a little bit, pushing yourself, going out into harsher conditions, and also checking out to see whether your kit actually works in those colder and more testing conditions. So some considerations to think about then. The actual weather itself, you want to check the weather, the forecast, before you head off anywhere. Use whatever you're going to use. I use one of the apps, and just look at the forecast. Make sure it's not going outside of what you're thinking you're going to be able to handle. So that's temperatures, the actual freezing point, whether it's gone below that. Wind chill is a big one to think about, because it's not just the actual ambient temperature, it's the wind chill. So what does it actually feel like? That can have a big effect. And how much snow or rain is there going to be, if any? And then you can plan and pack accordingly for those conditions. Obviously you're going to need more warm layers and clothing, so I'll talk about that more in the video. And an appropriate sleeping bag and whatever shelter you're going to use. So are you going to be taking a small tent? Are you going to be just using a tarp and a bivy bag? Things like that. And the last thing is thorough planning. Okay, so if you don't plan when you're going out in the winter in the UK, then you could come a cropper quite easily. So it doesn't really matter too much in the summer because the weather conditions won't be as harsh. But if you're out in the winter and you haven't planned thoroughly for your route, and that includes driving to where you need to get to, and you actually route on foot, things would go wrong quite badly. One example of this was I was up in the North Wales area once a couple of years ago, and I couldn't actually drive to the point I needed to get to. And this wasn't advertised online or anything, but there was one of the passes was actually closed, totally closed in Snowdonia. So things like, you know, look at local news, the stuff that's on Facebook, things like that, the groups, before you actually set off and drive to the location where you need to set off from. Okay, so what I've got here, this is a Bergen that's packed for 3 days wild camping in the UK in the winter. And as you can see, it's relatively compact. And I'll weigh it now so you can see exactly what the weight is here. So that's 29.1 pounds. And that's including all the food and water for 3 days out. Right then, so first thing I'm going to talk about is your actual clothing. So obviously when you go out in the hills in the winter, you need to be dressed for the occasion. You need to be dressed properly, nice and warm. But what I'd go for is a layering system, okay? So you don't really want to be wearing a big puffer jacket when you're walking around, because that big puffer jacket is going to get potentially wet from rain or snow, or you're just going to generate too much body heat as you're tabbing around with a Bergen on your back. So what I'd always go for is some sort of windproof layer like I'm wearing now. Underneath that, possibly a mid layer like a fleece, like a lightweight fleece like I'm wearing, and then a base layer underneath that. Waterproofs are great if it is raining and stuff, but I'd avoid wearing them all the time just because of the fact it can actually generate more heat in your body, which then creates more sweat. And then once the sweat has been generated in your body, that can actually freeze. So if it's really cold conditions, once you stop walking, if you've got sweat on your body, it can then freeze. So what I'm going to do then is specifically talk about some just stuff that's relevant to cold weather conditions with your clothing and all your accessories and stuff. So the first thing then is your base layer. So in the winter I'd always go for a long sleeve base layer like something like this. This helps wick away the sweat away from your body. I think very important layer to have on. This is another type of base layer. This is a rab one. This is slightly warmer. It's got like a really lightweight fleece in it, and it's also got a zip neck on it, so you can zip the neck up and keep the warmth in a little bit more. And also on this it's got the thumb holes, so you can pull those over your hands, give your hands a little bit more warmth, maybe underneath a pair of gloves. Okay, headwear then. Other than just normal woolly hats, you know, you want to be wearing some sort of woolly hat, at least when you stop anyway. Another thing you can have is something like this. This is a low alpine hat, and it's got fleece on the inside, and it's got a Gore-Tex outer, so a waterproof outer. A bit of a deputy dog hat, but these ear flaps, when it is really cold, do help keep the chill off your ears, which can be a bit of a problem when you're out in windy, cold conditions. Going along from that then, gloves. You want to take at least, I'd say, 2 pairs of gloves, and what I normally take is a heavier weight pair like these mountain equipment ones, which are waterproof, and again I've got like a fleecy type liner, and then I'll take a backup pair of gloves just in case they get cold, wet. So I've got another pair of waterproof gloves there. If you've ever had really cold hands, cold extremities, you'll know it's not a nice experience, so I do have that as a quite a high priority in my kit. Going on from there then, neckwear, so either something like a shemag or one of these neck gaiter things, snud, buff, whatever you want to call it. Now these are great, really lightweight. You can stick them in your pocket if you get a little bit warm as well. You can just pull it off your head or off your neck, stick it in your pocket, and they can be worn over your face to keep the chill off your face and your ears, or they can be just worn as a normal like a snud, like a neck gaiter, or you can actually put it over your head and wear it as a hat. So quite a good bit of kit. Okay, for footwear then, what you need to make sure is you've got something that's nice and sort of relatively cosy, that's going to give you protection from the weather. These are Gore-Tex, these are Salomon Quest 4Ds, and as you can see they give you good ankle support too. The higher the ankle is, then obviously more protection you're going to have of anything getting inside the boot. Right then, so what I'm going to talk about next is some survival equipment. These are the sort of bits and pieces that might save your life in an emergency, and there are only some small sort of lightweight bits and pieces that can make a difference though. So first thing I've got down here then on the left is a survival blanket. So that's one of those foil blankets you see people wearing at the end of the London Marathon, etc. They weigh virtually nothing, but if you wrap one of these around someone that's become a casualty, or yourself if you're suffering from hypothermia, it can help keep your body temperature up and save your life. However, that's just in an emergency, and these things will keep all the sort of body moisture in, and they will become wet after a certain amount of time. This thing here, this is called a Sol Escape Bivvy. Probably see that on there. That's like an upgraded version of one of those. So what this is, it's an actual bivvy bag as opposed to just a blanket, and it's actually breathable too, but it's got that silver foil reflective stuff on the inside to help sort of keep your body warm in. So that's, again, doesn't weigh much at all, but that's quite a good bit to have in your bag as an emergency. Next thing I've got here then, this is what I call my Survival Kit Plus. It's in a tin that you can use for cooking in and stuff. Plus it's got a brew kit in there and some hexarin, so you can actually cook on it. So it's got everything in there you need to do that with. Plus it's got lots of other stuff in there for, say, creating fires, fishing, trapping and all that sort of stuff. But I'll go through that in more detail in another video. Next thing I've got here then is my med kit. You see it's relatively compact, but it's got everything in there that I might need for things like scrapes, bumps, cuts, even so far as medication for if I got diarrhea whilst I was out on the hills for a couple of days. Okay, this next section here then, this last section here, this is what I call my signalling section. So yeah, you can see I've got my mobile phone sat there. That is obviously a very important tool to have. It's going to give you your straight direct line to phoning the emergency services if you need them. However, you can't rely on this because, as we all know, the battery life doesn't last that long. Also, it could get damaged, and also in the cold, the battery life on things like phones get degraded massively, so it'll run out even quicker than normal. But keep it protected, keep it in a place where you can grab easily, because that would be your primary signalling device for calling for help. Next thing we've got then is a whistle. So the whistle's going to give your warning of some sort of danger, or that you've been injured or whatever, far better than you screaming or shouting. The noise of a whistle can travel far further, and it uses far less energy than you screaming and shouting, so that's a great bit of kit to have. Next thing I've got here is a head torch, and on this head torch it's got like a strobe function there. So it might not look that great in broad daylight like today, but at night that's really, really bright, and that lasts for hours, that. So you can use that to just signal that you're in some sort of distress to someone else on the hill. Next thing I've got here then, this is potassium permanganate, and I've got that held within the survival tin that I've got here. This can be used for all sorts of good stuff, like hardening your feet up after you've had blisters, disinfecting water, starting fires, but in this instance, what you can actually use it for is marking snow. So if you're out in snowy conditions, you can actually write SOS in the snow. It dyes it like a deep red colour, and I'll demonstrate that in a minute. Underneath here then I've got a bright yellow panel. And this is actually a Bergen marker panel, so I've had this made up, and this basically, you can fit this to the top flap of your Bergen. It's just a tube of material, you put the top flap through, and that sits on top of your Bergen. So that's super visible, as you can see there. It's really bright, you can see that for miles and miles. So you could either just have that on the top of your Bergen, or if you did get in some sort of trouble, you could pull it out, attach it to something, or even potentially wave it around to create, you know, a bit of movement as well to attract attention. Right then, so what I'm going to do now is just demonstrate the use of that potassium permanganate that I hold within my survival tin. So first thing I'm going to do is going to get some water, pour that into the mess tin. Obviously you can use snow for this if that's all you've got, but you'd have to melt that as well. And then all I'm going to do is get the potassium permanganate vial that I've got within my survival tin, and it comes out as crystals, so this is like little crystals in here. I'm just going to put that within the water, and you don't need much at all. You can probably see there, I've hardly used anything out of that packet there. It looks like I haven't even touched it. Alright, so put that in the water, and then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to mix that up. I'm just going to stick my finger in, and you can see that really dark sort of purple colour that's created within that water, really dark. Okay, so using that against the snow, all you need to do is just pour it out like so. And you can put your signal in the snow. A little bit like Don't Eat Yellow Snow, but brighter. And you can see there that stands out against the snow. I've written S there, you could write SOS into the snow, you could put a cross, but basically that's going to stand out as something that's not natural against the background, isn't it? So if you have gone missing on the hills, or if you've injured your leg or something and fallen over, you could put this into the snow and have it as a signal for a search and rescue team to help come and find you. So yeah, that's it. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about is food and water. So just some of the considerations you need to think about when you're out in particularly cold conditions relevant to food and water. So rations then. There's lots of different kinds of foods out there. There's these type freeze-dried ones, which are great. Only thing is you need plenty of water with them, okay? So either you've got to carry that water, or you can potentially get snow, melt it, and use that with those. But they're really nice and tasty and stuff. They just do take up the water. Then you've got the pre-made ones that are sort of wet ration packs, the boil in a bag type. So this is a military one, but the ones you buy in the shops are exactly the same, they're just packaged differently. These are obviously slightly heavier than the dried ones because they've got the wetness in there already, but they're ready to eat straight away. So pros and cons to either there. You can eat these cold as they are. Loads of different types of these, but they're not too bad. Super noodles, I always take a whole load of super noodles with me, at least a couple of packets, because what you can do is mix up these type rations with noodles and make a sort of more substantial meal. Porridge oats, these are great when you're cold. Okay, so you can mix them up with boiling water obviously and make them up for your breakfast. Then what we've got is snacks. Okay, so cereal bars, Nutrigrain bars, that sort of thing, chewy bars. And what I've got at the back here is a packet of tuna. That's out of a military ration pack. What I would say is if it's particularly cold, if it's freezing, chocolate can actually go rock hard in the cold conditions. Okay, so when it is really cold I don't take chocolate out with me. But with all the rations there, then one thing to bear in mind that you will be burning more calories in cold conditions than you will in warm. So make sure you have got plenty of substantial food with you. Moving on from there then, brew kit. So I've got enough brew kit in there for at least 3 days. I've got, I think, 8 brews within that. I've got some of the 3-in-1 coffees and stuff like that, and tea just for different types of brews. Brews are a bit of a massive morale booster when you're in cold conditions, so make sure you have got a decent brew kit. Water carriage then, so going on to more of the water side. What I use in cold conditions is water bottles like this, or water bladders. So this is an actual, like a soft water bottle rather than camelbacks. Camelbacks are great in warm weather, but what can happen is the drinking tube can actually freeze. So if the weather goes really cold, the tube will freeze and it's difficult to actually drink out of it. Well, impossible when it's frozen. So I tend to use water bottles rather than camelbacks in cold conditions. One thing that's great in really cold conditions are these cups. So some people use thermos, flasks and stuff. I prefer these cups myself. You can make a brew up first thing in the morning, have half of it or whatever, or make a second brew up, stick it in one of these, and they're still warm a couple of hours later. So you stop for literally your brew stop after a couple of hours, break this out and it's instant morale. You don't even have to get your cooker out. Great bit of kit, I think. And last thing then, you obviously need something to cook all this on. So this is a Jetboil, one of the favourite sort of cookers in the UK. There's lots of different types out there. There's the little sort of MSR, pocket rockets, that sort of thing. These are brilliant. They've got the actual cooking vessel actually as built in as part of it. What I would say though is, if you're out for more than a day, is take a bigger source of gas than just the small one that's inside there, because it's just the little small one that fits in those ones. I'd take at least another small one, if not a large one, to make sure you've got enough gas to cook all your brews and your food and stuff on. Next thing I'm going to talk about then is your actual shelter cover. So first thing is your sleeping bag. Very important bit of kit. This is your home once you're out in the hills. Make sure it's suitable for the temperatures you're going to be working in. All right. What I use in really cold conditions is a Softy 10. So a snug back sleeping bag. I've used one of these for years. It's relatively compact for the warmth it gives you, so it's not a bad bit of kit at all. But just make sure you're happy with your sleeping bag and make sure you're not selling yourself out a bit by taking one that's nice and light but not very warm. Next thing's your sleeping mat, so something to sleep on. In cold conditions this is really important, because if you don't have a decent sleeping mat, your warmth will be lost through the ground. Okay, so make sure you've got a decent sleeping mat to sleep on. Doesn't matter what type it is, whatever you're happy using, but make sure you've got one. This is a full length one as well. When I'm in winter conditions I always use a full length one rather than a 3/4 one or a smaller one. Next thing is a bivvy bag. So if you're going to be using a tarp like I've got here, make sure you've got a bivvy bag as well, so that any sort of wetness that gets blown in, any rain or snow or whatever, you're protected from the cold with a bivvy bag as well. And the other thing this does is it helps up the temperature rating slightly on your sleeping bag too. And the last thing is something to sleep under or in. So what I've got here, and this is what I'd use, is a tarp if I could, if I'm in the right sort of areas. This is a wall bonnet tarp, and this will keep the rain off and the snow off and stuff. However, you know, depending on the conditions and the weather, temperatures, you might feel happier or you might be more comfortable using a small tent. That's obviously your own choice. Next thing I'm going to talk about then is my spare clothing. So this is a bag here. It's just an army issue bag that I use just to separate the kit from whatever else is in my bag. It's not really to keep it mega waterproof, but it does keep the water off to an extent. So first thing I'm going to pull out then is my socks, and I do keep this inside a separate Ziploc, totally 100% waterproof bag, at least 2 pairs of socks if I'm out for a couple of days, alright, so 1 pair per day. And with that, I've got some foot powder. Now with the socks then, they need to be decent quality, nice and warm, help prevent blisters and also keep your feet nice and warm and dry. Next thing I've got in here then is a down jacket. So this is my warm jacket, alright, and generally I don't use this whatsoever unless I'm static, unless I've stopped. So if I stop for a brew stop for half an hour or whatever, I might chuck this on if I start getting cold. If I've got to my bivvy location and then I've got my bivvy up and stuff, I might put this on. I generally won't wear this inside the sleeping bag. So what I do with this personally is I put it on outside of my sleeping bag. Once I get in there, I take it off so I've got some sort of benefit for when I actually get out of my sleeping bag. But if it's really super cold and you're feeling cold, then obviously whack that on anyway inside your sleeping bag. But yeah, I try and keep this out of the weather conditions as much as humanly possible, because this is your sort of last defence against the cold. So I definitely don't want to get this wet, so it stays in the bag most of the time. The only other thing I've got in here then is another long sleeve base layer. So just as a change of clothing in case you get totally soaking, if you're like soaking through sweat or through rain or whatever, good idea to have another base layer in there just as a dry sort of change into. Some people might carry long johns and stuff like that in there. Personally I don't bother, but it's not a bad idea to chuck some long johns in there as well, just to keep you warm at night inside your sleeping bag. But that's all I'd carry. If I was wearing my fleece, I'd have that underneath my jacket there. If I felt a little bit warm, then I'd take that off, stick it inside this as well, and I'd have that fleece as a backup. But generally I'll be wearing that if it's really cold conditions, and that's just all the clothing there really. Okay, so electronics. We rely more and more nowadays on electronic devices, and when we're in the fields, in the hills and stuff, there's no different. People tend to rely more on GPS rather than basic navigation skills nowadays, and that can cause problems obviously if you're just relying totally on those sort of things. So one thing to bear in mind in cold conditions is your batteries aren't going to last as long as they normally would. Alright, so personally my phone lasts a day just normally. So if you're out on the hills, then it's going to last less time, isn't it? So one thing you can do with your phone then is to keep it a bit warmer. It's just to put it inside a pocket when you're inside your jacket, and that will just help the battery last a little bit longer. Also, if you take out something like a battery charger, that's a really good idea for any electronic devices that might be reliant on a rechargeable battery as opposed to like AA's and AAA's. So take a battery charger, make sure it's fully charged up before you go out, and have that ready to go with all the relevant leads obviously that you need for your electronic devices. Right then, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is foot care. Most important part of your body when you're on the hills is your feet. Okay, if you're not looking after your feet, if you're not taking care of your feet, then you're not going to be able to get from A to B, and obviously that could cause you major dramas. Alright, so I've had frostnip in my toes in the past, and that's not due to bad admin. That was on a sear course in the winter, the worst weather that Dartmoor had seen for 40 odd years, and it's not a nice experience. Okay, it lasts for a long time as well. So make sure you look after your feet. First thing up, decent socks. Okay, you don't have to spend an absolute fortune on socks, but make sure you've got a nice pair of comfortable socks that got all the right materials and stuff. There's different types out there, just have a look. Make sure you've got some nice socks though. Secondly, foot powder. So when you stop at night, before you get into your sleeping bag, change your socks, powder your feet up, make sure your feet are nice and dry, free from any wetness and stuff like that, okay? Also with that, if you are starting to develop blisters, make sure you're carrying a blister kit. I've got one in my first aid kit, and I'm going to go through that in more detail in another video. But make sure you've got some sort of blister dressings, plasters and stuff like that, so you can look after your feet and get ready for the next day's walking, because you don't want to be halfway through, say, a 40-mile walk, and then find out that after 20 miles your feet are in absolute clip order and you've got nothing to look after your feet. So make sure you maintain your feet as you move. So that's me finished talking about preparation and planning for a trip on the hills in the winter in the UK. So I've gone through the various sort of bits of kit and stuff, but don't forget, you need to train with your kit. You need to make sure you're happy with it, confident with it, how it works, that it works in the weather conditions that you're going to be out in. If you don't, then you could potentially be one of these people that you see on the news that's getting rescued by mountain rescue just because you've gone out not prepared and planned for what you're doing. So make sure you're not. And anyway, hope that's been of some use to you. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and see you again soon.